the end goal and the end vision for many companies is to get as good as possible to replace humans. I think that is a trap.
We are going to put aside some time and money to experiment with these technologies. When we experiment, failure is an option.
You talk to 18 different vendors that are all saying they do approximately the same thing, right? How do you delineate the good ones from the bad ones?
Pretty much every knowledge-based role is going to have agentic and generative AI. But what are the challenges? What are the things that we need to be worried about?
Too many to talk about probably in one session.
Welcome to Kizen's Vision to Value series. My name is John Winner, and I'm here today with Manoj Kintali, and very excited to share with you real-world applications of AI and data and technology and how we're pushing the boundaries with what people can do. So thank you for joining us today, Manoj.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So would you go ahead and tell us a little bit about what it is that you do today and how you got here in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Manoj. I'm the head of engineering at Adonis. Adonis is in the health tech RCM space. So very specifically, our hypothesis, which is, I guess, pretty real if anyone looks into it, the world of revenue cycle management is just too complicated and favors the insurance companies and the payers, and makes the job of providers and their teams extremely difficult to collect the money that they deserve for services they've already performed. And it takes a lot of time and effort and energy away from them actually providing care to their patients. And we often like to refer to it as like a cat and mouse game, which heavily favors the insurance companies. So that's where Adonis comes in. We sit in the middle of the patient, the payer, and the provider, and are able to continuously monitor all of their revenue cycle data on a daily basis, real-time basis, be able to alert them to both like recognize that there are issues that are happening, find root cause analysis, and then automate the resolution of those steps. Awesome. So we want to, in essence, we want to level the playing field so that providers actually have a real shot at being able to continuously keep up with the changing rules that insurance companies and payers out there, they change almost every single day.
Yeah, and this is a very complicated technology challenge that you're managing. This is something that, as an individual provider, it's pretty much impossible for them to be able to figure this out. So you've been able to build a platform and a team that's been able to deliver this. And can you talk to me a little bit about how did you kind of think about building that team and think about the problem and how that's all structured?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you kind of nailed it when you said, we always started with the vision of building like a unified platform that brings together revenue cycle data from across all three of those entities. Mm-hmm. So we continuously collect. First thing we focused on is how do we go and integrate with these EHRs and practice management systems that have been traditionally very, very difficult to integrate with, to not just get like the clinical data, but all the claims, payer data, the financial data, the ledger data. And that's what RCM teams at these providers care about. And on top of that, we start collecting payer data, like policies. Sometimes these policies are like 600 pages long. And some hospital systems have like hundreds of people literally in a basement reading these on a daily basis. And it causes a high amount of strain, but more importantly, consistently reduces the quality of what they can actually parse out of these. So we started, again, it always starts with the data, especially in the business that we're in. So our first and foremost priority is how can we get the best data, the freshest data, the most reliable data, and how do we get it from the source of truth so that we take that and we can take on the complexity of synthesizing it, analyzing it, and building products and features to deliver the value of solving the actual problems that they have, whether that is some providers and systems that we meet with, like, hey, we have a really hard time having visibility. So we don't just go and build dashboards, we actually think about and say, what is the actual operations and functions you're trying to perform, and give them the visibility they need in order to do that better. And then we took one more step down and say, okay, well, rather than just identifying the problems for you, we're gonna tell you how to fix it. So we started to leverage a lot of AI technology in order to understand what are recommendations, models that we can build in order to train be trained on our own data in order to give them those recommendations. Then we said, wait, why don't we just go the last step and just actually go and fix it for them? And that's where we really started hitting a stride on going out to these providers, going out to these health systems, and resolve the actual issues that they have hundreds of humans, if not thousands of humans, solving it on a daily basis. That is honestly very repetitive, very strenuous, and again, most importantly, results in poor quality.
Right. And these are areas that are significantly understaffed. They're areas that without this technology coming in and helping, it puts the business at risk. It puts the business not achieving its objectives that it needs. And like you've talked about, it keeps our providers away from doing what we need them doing most.
Exactly.
So in this series, we love talking to people like you who have, real AI background, and you've taken it, it's not theoretical, you're using it in real world applications to drive value. So incredible work with what you're doing at Adonis.
Thank you.
You chose a simple problem, I'm joking, to go after.
Simple enough.
But yeah, it's very, very cool. And so I'm curious, the background that you have, because as an IT leader, there's so many, different opportunities to use these technologies today.
Yep.
But just to go back a little bit in your career and how you developed some of your methodologies, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to today being able to deploy and implement these leading technologies on really challenging problems like what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, I always consider myself a builder and an engineer, less than like more than just a leader or head of engineering. I think it all starts with the principles and the goals that you're trying to achieve, right? There are 1,000 different ways to solve any engineering problem or building any product. I started my career at a company called Yext, which was a traditional B2B listings company. Very small when I started, and then grew to be a public company in 2017. And I left shortly after to go to Meta for a few years to build ad products for Facebook apps. Then I first started my journey in healthcare tech at a company called Scalable, which was building consumer-facing applications for people with chronic GI conditions. And that led me to say, I still love B2B, I love healthcare. Adonis was like kind of the perfect spot, and I had the perfect blend of both. I spent most of my career, I would say, as an engineer, whether it was different titles, different levels, doesn't really matter. And what I discovered is the underlying technology on how you solve that problem continuously changes, right? Whether it's because chips are getting cheaper, or AI is being introduced, LLMs come into play, or APIs are being developed to make our life easier. So it always comes down to having a very, very clear picture of what the problem is, developing a hypothesis on like how you think you should solve the problem for your customer, being customer obsessed, and then thinking about how to bring in the tools and technologies to actually go solve that problem. So we see today, as I know the revolution of ChatGPT, OpenAI, Claude, Anthropic, all of the AI technologies that are out there. The way I started thinking about it is, how do you actually adopt it in your company, not just for actually building shiny, cool products for your customers, but really to think about every part of your organization. So if you think about the topology of your org and the actual operational complexities within your organization, you can leverage AI tools across the board. So at Adonis, for example, we're using it not just for building products and delivering more value for customers, but to actually improve the efficiency of the engineering team, improve the efficiencies of our sales organization, our marketing organization, even stitching together various hard to find processes within the entire org, operational processes. And I always encourage C-suite execs, and it is an executive problem. I highly encourage CEOs and CTOs or any leader within a company to think about what are the biggest challenges I have, how do I want to solve it, and then to think about how would I bring AI in to solve that. I think often there's this misconception that AI can solve everything. I was listening to a really cool podcast the other day, and it was talking about how so many companies have tried to replace Jira, replace Linear with AI. And what they're forgetting is that they're not replacing a tool, they're trying to replace the entire Scrum methodology. You're trying to replace an operational process, and AI is not there to completely do that today. And while the end goal and the end vision for many companies is to get as good as possible to replace humans, I think that is a trap that people often fall into. We're still here today to think about how do we make humans more efficient, actually expand their capabilities, get them thinking out of the box, give them like a thought partner, an assistant to actually do the job that they're already doing, but do it better, do it faster, do it more efficiently. And I think once we started thinking about leveraging like a lot of the AI technology that way, it became a lot easier to adopt. And I would say more often than not, people are afraid to use it. Like, oh, I don't know what this is going to do. I don't know how expensive it is. I don't know how it's going to hallucinate. Look, just like if you go back in time, think about any technology that was ever introduced, right, into an ecosystem of an org. Of course it's difficult, but that's the job of engineers or the leaders and people at companies to go figure out how do I use it effectively, not to just get to perfection, but to get better. Mm-hmm. And the only way you do it is start by doing it. Just get yourself into it. And if you have a problem that you're solving as a CEO, and you're like, oh, you know what, I have to go find someone to go do that. And I think where we are today is you could probably do it yourself. And this is the kind of that assistant you could leverage to go do it yourself.
Absolutely. There are so many gems in what you just said there. And that vision of how AI and teams can work together seamlessly is really something that when we say engineers solve the hard problems, like engineers make this new technology available to people. Right. And so not only have you been able to lead an organization where this is a critical technology inside your products that you deliver to your customers, but what you're saying is you've been able to take this technology and use it across the organization. And so we're seeing that pretty much every knowledge-based role is going to have agentic and generative AI in some way helping, and then obviously data and automation and bringing that stuff together.
Absolutely.
And so you're right though, there's a lot of fear, right? This is a new technology and you have a unique background. You've been in rapid growth situations where things have been new, things have been dynamic.
Chaotic.
Exactly.
Yep.
You've been at a company like Meta where you're dealing with the massive scale, like amongst the largest. And so for leaders that are sitting here saying, okay, I haven't had as much time as you to understand these AI technologies and really think about, how is my organization going to use it and how are we going to use it safely and compliantly and what are my risks? We always like to think about frameworks for decision making. And I know you and I have had some great conversations on that. So can you tell us a little bit about some of your frameworks and thoughts and kind of guiding principles that help you enable this technology to drive value across your company and you think may be able to help others as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it comes down to kind of first principles, and we can go back to like even middle school. Mm-hmm. And if you remember the scientific approach, right? You build a hypothesis, you think about what the constraints of the experiment, you define an experiment, build the constraints around that experiment, and you could translate that to a corporation and say, again, here's the problem we're solving, here's a hypothesis I have on what could solve that. You design an experiment to go see if you can solve it. And then define the constraints, the timeline, time box, et cetera, the cost, the amount of investment you want to make into that experiment, and give yourself, but though that process is, has been battle tested for centuries, it works well, you as a leader have to not only define that framework and go deploy it in your organization, but you also have to enable a safe space for people to actually go and run that experiment. And you have to be the one that actually is thinking about the ethics, the compliance, the security. And I think especially with AI, because of the rapid growth that it's had over the past 2 years, honestly, it's really, really difficult to stay on top of it, keep up with. There's quite literally a new model coming out every single day, right? And you're never going to keep up with it, frankly. And you could be spending your entire day just listening to podcasts, demos, videos, and reading articles about what the new AI tech is. So my usual principle is to become the subject matter expert at the value and the problems that you're trying to solve, right? If you have that, then you can either find time on weekends or after work or during work to go learn about these technologies that exist. And also marry that with bringing in the right people from the industry that have done this or that are very familiar with this, and not just, and I would say don't hire just for people that are familiar with a particular tool or stack, but really think about hiring people with a high IQ and EQ that are very adaptable and learn, because that's what you need. You need people that can learn quickly. You need people that can kind of embrace the chaos that's happening in the industry, and then come to you with a synthesized opinion, and a strong opinion. Hopefully, you always want to bring in people with strong opinions, and you as a leader then has to go take on that risk, right? You have to take on the risk of, again, running that experiment, thinking about the outcomes of that, and also not being afraid to say this didn't work, right? There's a deterministic way of solving most challenges in computer science, and then now we're finding that there's non-deterministic ways of solving it, and that's what the AI is bringing to the table. And I think there's also kind of a trap that I see pretty often where people jump to AI as like the first thing to solve. More often than not, it's not actually the perfect solution to achieve the solution that you want. I think there's often a lot of conflation between automation, agentic capabilities, AI, and all combined together, mushed together into saying AI agents. And while that is where we're headed, there's no way of getting around the fact that almost every company in the world is going to build an orchestration of agents and capabilities, because that is what reflects the real world operational challenges at most organizations. You still should feel good about making decisions where, hey, there's actually an easier path that hallucinates less and stops faking what it thinks it should do, and is significantly cheaper and significantly easier to deploy and build. Like, don't be afraid to build RPA bots. Don't be afraid to just talk to an API, or go back to kind of some of the fundamentals on how you would calculate like the sum of a table. You don't need an AI to do that. You just need something that just scans a table and sums it up for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So love what you're saying there, and completely aligned with the idea that we have to be able to combine the fundamentals of integrated data that's accurate and that's timely and that's available, right? Yep. With traditional intelligent automation, and layering in the agentic and generative AI capabilities into a total mix that solves the problems the way that organizations need. And so hearing kind of what we've discussed so far, I hear a few different principles here. So first of all, for leaders, we want to be able to build teams, and I think you emphasize this, and I think this is great, where they go deep into understanding the problem. Yep, right?
Exactly.
And so what is it that the workflow, for example, is actually needing? Like, what is the problem statement? What does the outcome need to be? Because there are going to be opportunities with this to deploy automation and AI into these workflows, but there's also going to be the opportunities to reshape and reinvent them.
Absolutely.
In new ways. And so going down and really understanding what is it that we're accomplishing here is, I think, the first thing where we're able to build engineers with that subject matter expertise and bring that together. So that's one great action step to have people be much more successful in what they do, right?
Absolutely.
Secondly, we want to introduce a culture of experimentation, right? Where we're going to say we are going to put aside some time and money to experiment with these technologies, right? And we are going to say that when we experiment, failure is an option. Right? And it's important to define what success and failure for the initiative is
100%.
Ahead of time, right? And to understand that we're not going to have a 100% success rate. Then that moves into, as leaders, what tools and culture can we put in place to have our team from group one, principle one, and our philosophy of experimentation, which is our second point, how can we rapidly enable them to prototype, to test, so that they can more quickly complete their experiments, and when they successfully have an experiment, scale that up, right? That's when we talk about the architecture that we put in place as an engineering organization. I think you've done an incredible job of that with everything you've put together in your team.
100%. I just want to add one thing that I think you said is really, really important to double click on. we are at a time and place just in the world, especially within, with the tech industry in general, where it is more important than ever to be outcome focused and not just, if you think about, even like 6 to 7 years ago, most engineers are like, hey, go build this web application, right? It's fairly straightforward, not as ambiguous. And you get mocks, you get a PRD, you write a tech spec, and you say, these are the systems and architecture I need to build. This is what the UI looks like, and I go build it and deploy it and scale it, et cetera. And nowadays, that you really hit something that's, I think, is super important, which is how do you actually critically think about what the solution needs to be to achieve the outcome that you need, and not immediately just jump to the status quo of, we need to go build this application. And I think that's where marrying the subject matter expertise with the strengths and skills of people that are enabled to actually experiment on how to solve that problem, combining both of those has been more important than ever. And at Adonis, we found that to be true over and over again. And every time we look at a problem, we don't just immediately say, oh, this is how the world is solving it, so we're just going to solve it better. But no, it's like, how can we actually be strongly opinionated on how to solve this, where it might not take like 100 steps to go solve the same problem. We could put together these three or four tools and services. Some of them could be Gen AI, LLMs, RPA bots, et cetera, and deliver the same exact outcome for much faster, cheaper, with higher quality.
Right. And I think that's so important for engineers and engineering teams, because it's like, we can look at, when we're assigned a ticket, for example, okay, I'm completing this ticket, and often you have complex problems that are broken down into many tickets, right? And so we always really try to emphasize with our teams deep understanding of, even when you're just individually working on that ticket, when you're early in your career as an engineer, how do you understand how this is fitting into the business solution?
Absolutely.
And to me, that is like rocket fuel for your career in engineering.
100%.
If you get that intimacy with how the technology is being used. It develops a very unique and rare skill set for individuals that can do that.
I couldn't agree more. And I think getting engineers to be customer obsessed, regardless of which team, what your role is, what your title is, if you're not consistently thinking about like how your work ladders up to the larger, you can call it OKRs, mission, goals, whatever it is. But if you just think about, as you said, the scope of the ticket, the scope of the story, your project initiative, then what you end up having is a team of people just being considered like a workforce and not actually problem solvers.
Right. 100%. All right, so we've talked about how much potential there is here, and we've talked about a very useful framework that people can use, or they can pull parts of that into their organization to help have more success with their initiatives. But what are the challenges? What are the things that we need to be worried about?
Too many to talk about probably in one session. But I think I want to start with some cultural challenges. I think that is something that is ubiquitous across the entire kind of industry. There, again, I think I talked a little bit about the fear of adoption, fear of change, right? For the entire history of humankind, fear of change is just something that exists. And that applies now, right? And in fact, it applies now more than ever, because there is even more confusion, more new things in tech that's coming into play. You talk to 18 different vendors that are all saying they do approximately the same thing, right? How do you delineate the good ones from the bad ones? Like, how do you actually provide a framework for people to go and search for these vendors and find the right things? And I think this is where like leadership style also needs to change, and to really think about the frameworks you want to provide to your team so that they could still remain autonomous, yet still actually go find the right vendor for your tool, service, whatever you're building, right? So I think really getting rid of that fear of change within your organization is important. And that's not just by coming up with a new cultural value or talking about an all hands. It's really actually doing the change yourself so that others can do it. Second big challenge is there's this underlying fear that for a lot of companies to adopt, there's a lot of assumptions made about where AI is today. It's like, oh, it's too expensive, it's really hard to use, or it hallucinates, etc. it's going to get better, right? On its own. It's just going to get better on its own. It's going to improve on its own. So this is kind of where I say you have to have some level of conviction, right? And take some risk, just like you do with any other part of your job. And how do you actually quantify and define that risk and be able to convince the rest of the organization, align them on that risk? But if you have a true conviction that this technology is just going to continue to get better and better, I mean, it is a multi-trillion-dollar industry already. There's no stopping it. There's no one that's going to be able to say one day, never mind, this is not working, right? Yeah. That train is already left, and you just either have to hop on it or fail, honestly. Yeah. And the last is being able to, again, continuously like be open to change. I know it's like a little different than fear of changing. That I was more referring to about like fear of changing how you do things, but continue to adapt to the rapidly changing industry. Even at Adonis, we discover like there's so many competitors coming out with like point solutions and all these things, and they come out and say, hey, we're just going to go build this little workflow to solve your problem. But then how can you as a company adapt to that competitive market? Because I can guarantee that there's now going to be a competitor in every single space that's going to come out with the advent of like vibe coding and people that can just go build a website in 3 seconds through some Gen AI tool. And it's going to come out, and either, again, you have to continuously adapt and continuously monitor the competition and think about what's the true value that they're providing, what is my true competitive moat, and keep investing in your moat, right? Yeah. And don't be afraid to say, like, have low ego, and don't be afraid to say, you know what, we don't need to go build this AI service. There's someone that's doing it better out there, so I should go buy it. So that build versus buy decision now is more important than ever, in my opinion.
That's a great perspective. And I also love what you're talking about in what we're saying, being open to change. And one of the things that we've had an interesting experience with when we've been on site doing AI demos with different leadership teams is sometimes we will have people say, oh yeah, I tried it and it didn't work, right?
Yeah.
And they tried it a year ago.
Yeah.
And then we'll be like, let's try it today.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
It's a totally different world with how the models have progressed.
100%.
So one of the things that we like to think about, because it's like, what are the costs? How do I prioritize? Like, this is amazing. This can help all over, but how do I know what it can help? I'm going to experiment, but how do I know what I should experiment with first? And so as an organization, sitting down and saying, where are the areas that if AI were able to help, it would be extremely valuable for us, and actually quantifying that. I find that to be a really good input for helping to decide what should we go and experiment with.
Absolutely.
And then you run your experiment, and like you said, some of the experiments, it's not gonna be there yet, right? Yep. It's like, okay, it didn't do this, that's okay. But really importantly, put it back on your calendar to try it again in a quarter.
Yep, absolutely, 100%.
Because 2 weeks later, there might have been a change that made that now viable or made that interesting. So that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up a good point, like where do I start, like across the organization? I encourage everyone to, if you haven't done it in a while, talk to your CFO. Talk to your head of finance and work with them to understand what are the biggest cost centers in your organization, right? What are your COGS? Where's your OPEX? And go look at where you're spending the most money if you're thinking about the efficiency piece of it, right? And then you could say, let's look at margins and say, how do I improve my margin? So start with those fundamental questions you would normally ask or should be asking anyway. And then that's a pretty good starting point. Like, hey, if your sales team is spending way too much time and money to bring in leads, then maybe you should focus on that first and say, where can AI help generate more leads? Or if your engineers are spending too much time, if you have like 4 test engineers that are writing automated tests in a team of 30, ask yourself, is that the right way to use that money? Can AI help me write the tests that I should be able to write? So I think just looking at costs is a pretty good starting point.
Yeah, 100%. I love that tip. I've never heard someone say, go talk to the CFO and really understand the business better from that metrics perspective. That is a really interesting tip from an engineering perspective, how to truly understand the organizations, right?
Absolutely.
We know going and talking about the customers, but the financial side is important as well, especially when we're talking about what would be worth the ROI of the investment.
Absolutely.
And if someone's worried about, well, what would I even ask? You can go to any of the LLMs and it can
ask them, what should I ask my CFO? Oh, 100%.
So it's more achievable than ever before. Awesome. So Last question here. So since you work with this technology and you have a team underneath you that's applying it regularly, not only in your product, but across the organization, where do you think are some of the biggest opportunities where someone's like, okay, I've got all these ideas, but where would be some places where you would say, oh, maybe think about this? There could be some opportunities there.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think within engineering itself, which is where I spent most of my time on, there's plenty of opportunity to keep expanding the kind of some of the strenuous tasks that you do, right? Whether it is, starting with the smallest things. I was just talking to an engineer before I came here, and I was like, hey, we really should add more comments to, our functions and files that we write. And I was like, honestly, Cursor does a fantastic job. Just use it to do it. Don't be, if you think it's annoying and strenuous, actually go leverage it. That's a perfect time to leverage it. So starting to find like those small opportunities, but not just to kind of nitpick at things and solve them, but to create a habit, right? How do you actually habituate an entire team to leverage it? One of the most challenging and painfully time-taking things that we do, but it's extremely important to the business. In fact, the most critical thing is building our integrations. We build super robust integrations with these EHR, PM systems, et cetera. And a lot of it involves like navigating their source systems, spending a lot of time to understand their data sets, thinking about how that maps to like our unified data model. And a lot of this, literally 2 years ago, AI couldn't solve. But now with like invention of the MCP model and how do you actually build connectors to these databases, they can understand that data probably, I wouldn't say better than you, but given the right instructions, given the right context, do 80%, get 80% of the way there. And that's where I think you could significantly start to save time. But I would also encourage people to think about security and governance and compliance. Some of the AI technology that's out there to actually help you improve your posture across all of these things, even risk management. It's absolutely incredible. I mean, you used to need like several security leads and engineers, and there are now tools that are out there that can do that job and never get tired of doing it. And I think that's kind of the wonderful thing about it is it never gets tired. It just keeps going. All you have to do is just throw a little bit more compute to scale it. Yeah. Yeah, I would say keep finding ways to, again, think about efficiency, but also think about the value you're providing to your customers through these tools and services. Can you inch one step further? Can you provide like 1% better value through these tools? And that's when you start to define that competitive moat that others can't do, right? Because then the complexity then gets siloed to you being able to do 1% better that someone else can't.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Manoj, for joining us today in our Vision to Value series. It's incredible what you and the team are building at Adonis. And if people want to learn more about your work at Adonis and how you're helping in the healthcare revenue cycle management and beyond capabilities, they can find that at adonis.io.
Yep.
And we want to thank you as well from the Kizen side. We're having a lot of fun helping people accelerate their agentic and generative AI capabilities inside their workflows and their teams. And thank you again for the time. That was a great conversation and so valuable for everyone. So
thank you so much. Really appreciate you guys having me.
Absolutely. See ya. Signing off.